In a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, life moved at a slow and steady pace. The townsfolk were close-knit, always ready to lend a helping hand or share a warm smile. But one day, the tranquility of the town was shattered by an unimaginable tragedy: the passing of Emily Carter, a bright and cheerful 12-year-old girl whose laughter had once filled every corner of the community. Her untimely death in a car accident left everyone heartbroken, and the entire town came together to pay their respects during her funeral. The church where the service was held was packed with people, family members, friends, teachers, and neighbors, all united in grief. Emily's coffin, draped in white flowers, stood at the center of the room, a stark reminder of the young life that had been lost too soon. As mourners filed past the casket to say their final goodbyes, tears flowed freely, and whispers of disbelief echoed through the air. No one could quite believe that someone so full of life was now gone forever. As the ceremony drew to a close, the pallbearers carefully carried Emily's coffin outside to place it into the hearse. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some hugging each other for comfort while others stood silently, lost in thought. Just as the last few stragglers started heading toward their cars, something strange caught everyone's attention. A mangy, scruffy dog appeared seemingly out of nowhere and sat down next to the coffin, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. Its fur was matted, and its ribs showed through its thin frame, but its eyes burned with an intensity that made people stop and stare. No one recognized the dog. It wasn't wearing a collar, and it didn't look like any of the pets belonging to the families in the area. Yet there it was, sitting steadfastly beside Emily's coffin as if guarding it. Some people tried to shoo the dog away, thinking it might be a stray looking for scraps of food. But instead of leaving, the dog let out a low growl, warning them to stay back. It was clear that this animal had no intention of moving. Curiosity quickly turned to concern as the dog refused to budge, even when gently coaxed with kind words and gestures. A few children from the crowd approached cautiously, holding out pieces of bread they had saved from lunch earlier. The dog sniffed the offerings but ignored them, keeping its gaze fixed on the coffin. This behavior puzzled everyone. How did this dog know Emily? And why was it so determined to stay by her side? Despite their confusion, the adults decided not to force the issue. They assumed the dog would eventually wander off once the procession began. After all, it was just a stray, right? Surely it wouldn't follow them all the way to the cemetery. With heavy hearts, the mourners climbed into their cars and the hearse pulled away, carrying Emily's body to its final resting place. To everyone's astonishment, the dog trotted after the hearse, matching its pace step for step. Even as the vehicles picked up speed, the dog ran alongside them, never faltering despite its frail appearance. The sight of the dog chasing the hearse struck a chord with many who witnessed it. There was something profoundly moving about the loyalty and determination displayed by this creature. For a moment, the sadness weighing heavily on everyone's shoulders lifted slightly, replaced by awe and admiration for the bond this dog seemed to have shared with Emily. People rolled down their windows to get a better look, murmuring amongst themselves about what could have brought the two together. When the procession finally arrived at the cemetery, the dog was still there, panting heavily, but refusing to give up. It stationed itself near the gravesite, lying down in the grass as if claiming its spot. Throughout the burial ceremony, it remained eerily still, occasionally letting out soft whimpers that sent shivers down the spines of those nearby. It was almost as if the dog understood the significance of the moment and was grieving alongside the humans. After the service ended, most of the attendees gradually drifted away, returning to their daily lives burdened by the weight of their loss. But the dog stayed behind, curled up next to the freshly dug earth where Emily's coffin lay buried. No amount of coaxing could persuade it to leave. Eventually, the cemetery caretaker gave up trying to remove it, deciding it was best to let nature take its course. Maybe the dog would move on once night fell, he reasoned. But deep down, something about the situation felt unusual. Why had this dog formed such a strong attachment to Emily? Where had it come from and how had it found its way to her funeral? These questions lingered in the minds of those who had seen the dog's unwavering devotion. Little did they know the answers to these mysteries would soon unravel in ways none of them could have anticipated. For now, though, the dog remained by Emily's grave, a silent sentinel watching over the place where her short but impactful life had come to rest. Among the crowd at Emily's funeral were members of a local biker gang known as the Iron Riders. Despite their tough appearance, leather jackets adorned with patches, heavy boots, and roaring motorcycles, they were respected in the community for their acts of kindness and charity. Over the years, they had organized fundraisers for struggling families, repaired homes for elderly residents, and even mentored troubled teens. Their reputation was one of strength combined with compassion, making them unlikely but cherished allies in the town. When the mysterious dog appeared at the funeral, the bikers were among the first to notice its unusual behavior. They watched as it followed the hearse to the cemetery, refusing to leave Emily's side even after the burial was complete. Something about the dog's loyalty struck a chord with them. It reminded them of the bonds they shared within their own group, a brotherhood built on trust, protection, and unwavering support. As the mourners dispersed, the bikers lingered near the grave, observing the dog lying quietly in the grass, rain soaking its already matted fur. One of the bikers, Jake, stepped forward. A former police officer who had joined the gang after retiring, Jake had a keen eye for detail and an instinct for uncovering hidden truths. He crouched beside the dog, speaking softly to avoid startling it. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. "What's your story?" The dog lifted its head slightly, its dark eyes meeting Jake's. There was a sadness in those eyes that went beyond ordinary grief. It was the look of someone who had endured hardship and loss far greater than anyone should bear. Jake reached out slowly, letting the dog sniff his hand before gently patting its head. To his surprise, the dog didn't flinch or growl. Instead, it leaned into his touch, seeking comfort. This small act of trust convinced Jake that the dog needed help. Turning to his fellow riders, he said, "We can't just leave him here. Look at him, he's been through hell." The other bikers nodded in agreement. Together, they approached the dog, offering soothing words and gentle encouragement. At first, the dog hesitated, clearly wary of strangers. But when one of the bikers pulled out a sandwich from his pack and offered it piece by piece, the dog finally relented, cautiously accepting the food. Emboldened by this breakthrough, the group carefully coaxed the dog into their van, wrapping it in a warm blanket to shield it from the cold. Back at the clubhouse, a sprawling warehouse converted into a communal space, the bikers set up a makeshift bed for the dog near the fireplace. They cleaned its matted fur, treated its wounds, and fed it a hearty meal. For the first time in what seemed like ages, the dog began to relax, curling up in the warmth of its new surroundings. Though still cautious, it allowed the bikers to pet it and talk to it, responding with tentative tail wags and soft whimpers. They named it Shadow, both for its dark coat and the air of mystery surrounding it. However, Shadow's presence wasn't without its challenges. During the night, the dog grew restless, pacing back and forth and occasionally letting out mournful howls that echoed through the clubhouse. These haunting sounds kept the bikers awake, prompting them to wonder what trauma the dog might have endured. Was it merely mourning the loss of Emily, or was there something deeper driving its behavior? The next morning, the group gathered around Shadow, discussing what to do next. "This dog knows something," Jake said firmly. "It didn't just show up at Emily's funeral by accident. There's a connection there, and we need to figure out what it is." His words resonated with the others, sparking a sense of purpose among the bikers. They decided to investigate further, determined to uncover the truth behind Shadow's appearance and its bond with Emily. Their first step was to visit Sarah, Emily's mother, hoping she might shed some light on the situation. When they arrived, at her modest home, they found her sitting on the porch, staring blankly into the distance. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. The bikers introduced themselves politely, explaining that they had taken in the stray dog from the funeral and wanted to know if she recognized it. Sarah frowned, shaking her head. "No, I've never seen that dog before," she said hesitantly. Her voice was shaky. her eyes darting nervously as if she feared saying the wrong thing. "It must have wandered onto our property recently, but I don't know anything about it." Her response raised more questions than answers. If the dog hadn't belonged to Emily or her family, how had it formed such a strong attachment to her? And why had it followed her coffin to the cemetery? The bikers exchanged skeptical glances, sensing that Sarah wasn't telling the whole truth. Still, they thanked her for her time and left, vowing to dig deeper. Over the next few days, the bikers scoured the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking questions about Emily's life. Many neighbors expressed fond memories of the girl, describing her as kind-hearted and intelligent. However, a darker picture began to emerge as well. One elderly woman mentioned seeing bruises on Emily's arms during a brief encounter weeks before the accident. At the time, she had assumed the girl was clumsy or prone to accidents, but now, the memory troubled her. Another neighbor recalled hearing loud arguments coming from Sarah's house late at night. The fights often involved shouting and slamming doors, though no one had ever called the authorities. "I always thought it was just stress," the neighbor admitted. "But looking back, maybe I should have done more." These fragmented pieces of information painted a troubling portrait of Emily's home life. The bikers couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had occurred, something that might explain not only the dog's behavior, but also the circumstances surrounding Emily's death. Determined to get to the bottom of things, they decided to bring Shadow along on their investigation, hoping his reactions might provide additional clues. During one visit to a nearby park where Emily used to play, Shadow suddenly became agitated. He tugged at his leash, pulling the bikers toward a secluded area behind a cluster of trees. There they discovered remnants of a makeshift campsite, charred wood from a fire, empty cans, and discarded clothing. It was clear that someone had been living there recently. Could this have been Shadow's hiding spot before he found Emily? Or was it connected to something else entirely? As the puzzle pieces slowly came together, the bikers realized they were dealing with more than just a stray dog and a tragic accident. Shadow's loyalty to Emily hinted at a deeper, darker truth, one that would require courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. Little did they know their journey was only beginning, and the revelations ahead would test their resolve in ways they could never have imagined. As the bikers continued their investigation, they found themselves piecing together fragments of Emily's life that painted a troubling picture. The more they uncovered, the heavier the weight of suspicion grew. What had initially seemed like a tragic accident was beginning to look like something far more sinister. Each clue they discovered led them closer to understanding the bond between Shadow and Emily, and the events that may have driven the dog to follow her coffin. One evening, after another long day of questioning neighbors and retracing Emily's final days, the bikers gathered at their clubhouse to discuss what they had learned. Jake spread out notes on the table, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Something doesn't add up," he said, tapping a finger against one of the papers. "We know Sarah struggled with addiction and money problems, and we've heard about those late-night arguments. But none of this explains why Shadow is so attached to Emily, or why he acts like he's been through hell." The others nodded in agreement. They had all noticed Shadow's behavior, the way he flinched at sudden movements, how he avoided certain areas of the clubhouse as if they triggered painful memories, and the mournful howls that still echoed during quiet moments. It was clear the dog had endured trauma, but its connection to Emily remained a mystery. Determined to dig deeper, Jake suggested visiting Sarah again. This time, they planned to approach her differently, more directly. When they arrived at her house the following morning, she looked even worse than before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug of coffee. She seemed startled by their presence, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if expecting someone else to walk in. "Sarah," Jake began gently, "we need to talk about Emily. We think there's more to her story than anyone knows. You might be the only person who can help us understand." For a moment, Sarah hesitated, her lips pressed tightly together. Then, with a shaky sigh, she motioned for them to sit down. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Things got bad toward the end. The bikers listened intently as Sarah recounted the months leading up to Emily's death. She spoke of her struggles with substance abuse, which had spiraled out of control after losing her job. Unable to pay rent or provide for her daughter, she had allowed her boyfriend Derek to move in. At first, Derek seemed like a solution to her problems. He paid the bills, bought groceries, and promised to take care of them. But it didn't take long for his true nature to reveal itself. He wasn't always cruel, Sarah explained, tears streaming down her face. At least, not at first. But when he drank, he became someone else entirely. He'd yell at me, throw things, break furniture, and then he started taking it out on Emily. The room fell silent as Sarah's words sank in. Derek, a man no one had mentioned until now, suddenly loomed large in the narrative. According to Sarah, he resented having to share space with Emily, viewing her as an inconvenience. He would berate her for minor mistakes, accuse her of being lazy or disobedient, and sometimes resort to physical violence. Sarah claimed she tried to intervene, but Derek's threats kept her silent. He said he'd hurt both of us if I told anyone, she confessed, her voice breaking. I was scared. For Emily. For myself. I didn't know what to do. The bikers exchanged grim looks. Everything Sarah described aligned with the signs they had picked up from the neighbors, the bruises, the arguments, the overall sense of unease surrounding Emily's home life. But one detail still nagged at them. Shadow. If Derek had abused Emily, could he have also harmed the dog? And if so, how had Shadow ended up at the funeral? To answer these questions, they decided to bring Shadow along on their next visit to Sarah. They hoped his presence might trigger a reaction or jog her memory. When they returned later that afternoon, Shadow trotted beside them, his leash held firmly by Jake. As soon as Sarah saw the dog, her face went pale. She froze, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if bracing herself. I thought you said you didn't recognize him, Jake said quietly, studying her reaction. Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes darting between the bikers and Shadow. Finally, she nodded. I lied, she admitted. That dog. He showed up a few weeks ago. He was always hanging around outside, watching over Emily. Sometimes she'd sneak him food when Derek wasn't looking. She loved him. He was her only friend. The pieces began falling into place. Shadow hadn't just wandered onto their property. He had sought out Emily, drawn to her kindness despite his own hardships. In return, Emily had cared for him, sharing whatever scraps she could spare. Together they had formed a bond born out of mutual suffering, a bond that transcended words and lasted beyond death. But Sarah wasn't finished. With visible effort, she continued speaking, her voice trembling. Derek hated that dog. He'd kick it, throw rocks at it, anything to make it go away. But it wouldn't leave. It stayed close, protecting Emily as best it could. She paused, wiping her eyes. On the night of the accident, Derek came home drunk. He was screaming at me, accusing me of stealing money. When Emily tried to step in, he grabbed her arm and dragged her outside. She ran into the street. Sarah broke down completely, unable to finish. The bikers sat in stunned silence, the full weight of the truth settling over them. Emily hadn't died in a random accident. She'd been fleeing from a nightmare. And Shadow, the loyal companion who refused to abandon her, had witnessed it all. With this new information, the bikers knew they couldn't let the matter rest. They contacted local authorities, sharing everything they had uncovered, including Sarah's confession and Shadow's role as a silent witness. While they understood that proving Derek's involvement might be difficult without concrete evidence, they were determined to ensure justice was served. For Emily, for Shadow, and for every child who deserved safety and love, they vowed to see this through. As they left Sarah's house that evening, Shadow walked quietly beside them, his head held high for the first time since they had found him. Though the road ahead promised challenges, the bikers felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had uncovered a dark chapter in Emily's life, but they also carried with them the hope that her story could lead to change, not just for her family, but for others facing similar struggles. The revelation that Derek, the volatile boyfriend Sarah had reluctantly described, was at the center of Emily's tragic death sent shockwaves through the Iron Riders. They knew they were dealing with something far bigger than a stray dog and a grieving family. Shadow's behavior, combined with Sarah's confession, pointed to a pattern of abuse and neglect that had gone unchecked for too long. But proving Derek's involvement wouldn't be easy. He was careful, manipulative, and likely aware of how to cover his tracks. Still, the bikers were determined to dig deeper, convinced that Shadow held more answers than anyone realized. Jake, the former police officer among them, took charge of the next steps. "We need to understand what Shadow knows," he told the YI group one evening as they sat around the clubhouse table. "He's been through hell just like Emily. If we can figure out what he's trying to tell us, maybe we can build a stronger case against Derek." At first, the idea seemed far-fetched. How could a dog provide evidence? But Jake had experience working with animal behavior specialists during his time on the force, and he knew there were experts trained to interpret signs of trauma in animals. With renewed determination, the bikers reached out to a local veterinarian who specialized in behavioral analysis. Dr. Linda Harper agreed to meet with them after hearing about Shadow's story, intrigued by the possibility of uncovering hidden truths through the dog's actions. The following day, the bikers loaded Shadow into their van and drove to Dr. Harper's clinic. The dog seemed uneasy at first, his ears flattened and his tail tucked tightly between his legs as they entered the unfamiliar building. But Jake stayed close, speaking softly to reassure him, while the others kept their distance to avoid overwhelming him. Dr. Harper greeted them warmly, her calm demeanor putting everyone, including Shadow, at ease. "Let's take this slowly," she said, leading them to a quiet examination room. She began by observing Shadow's body language, noting how he reacted to different stimuli. At first, he appeared cautious but not overly anxious. However, when Dr. Harper pulled out a stethoscope and moved closer, Shadow flinched violently, backing away until he hit the wall. His breathing quickened and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Dr. Harper exchanged a glance with Jake. "This isn't normal fear," she explained. "It's a conditioned response. Something, or someone, has taught him to associate certain objects or movements with pain." Over the next hour, Dr. Harper conducted a series of tests designed to identify triggers that might reveal past trauma. She used props like raised voices, sudden hand gestures, and even photographs to gauge Shadow's reactions. What she discovered was chilling. When shown a picture of Derek, a photo Jake had discreetly obtained from Sarah's social media, Shadow's entire demeanor changed. His hackles rose and he bared his teeth, emitting a guttural snarl that sent chills through the room. It was clear. This man terrified him. But the most heart-wrenching moment came when Dr. Harper mimicked the sound of a slamming door. Shadow froze, his eyes wide with panic, before bolting to the corner of the room and cowering. He whimpered softly, trembling uncontrollably, as if reliving a memory too painful to bear. The bikers watched in stunned silence, their hearts breaking for the dog who had endured so much. Dr. Harper concluded her assessment with a heavy sigh. "Shadow has suffered significant abuse," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Based on his responses, it's likely he was repeatedly beaten, possibly with objects like belts or sticks. The cigarette burns I noticed earlier suggest deliberate cruelty, and his reaction to the photo and sounds indicates he associates these things with Derek." The news hit the bikers hard. They had suspected Derek was dangerous, but hearing the extent of his brutality confirmed their worst fears. Shadow wasn't just a victim of neglect, he had been systematically tortured. Yet despite everything he had endured, he had remained fiercely loyal to Emily, doing his best to protect her even when he couldn't save himself. Armed with Dr. Harper's findings, the bikers returned to the clubhouse to regroup. They now had undeniable proof of Derek's violent tendencies, but they needed more to bring him to justice. Jake suggested revisiting Sarah, this time with Shadow in tow, hoping her guilt would push her to cooperate fully. "She's scared of him," Jake reminded the group. "But if we show her we're serious about helping, maybe she'll finally speak up." The next morning they arrived at Sarah's house unannounced. Shadow trotted beside them, his leash held firmly by Jake. When Sarah opened the door, her face went pale at the sight of the dog. She hesitated, clearly torn between letting them in and shutting them out. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "We know about Derek," Jake said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. "And we know what he did. To Emily, and to Shadow. You can't keep protecting him, Sarah. He's dangerous." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking as she buried her face in her palms. For several minutes, she didn't say a word. Then slowly, she looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted to leave him," she whispered. "So many times I tried, but he always found me. He'd threatened to hurt Emily if I didn't come back. I thought staying was safer. I was wrong." Her words hung heavy in the air, a painful admission of failure and regret. Jake knelt beside her, his tone softening. "It's not your fault, Sarah. None of this is. But you have a chance to make things right. Tell us everything. About the night of the accident, about Derek's temper, about how he treated Shadow. We'll make sure he pays for what he's done." With Shadow lying quietly at her feet, Sarah began to open up. She recounted the escalating violence in their home, describing how Derek's anger often spilled over onto both her and Emily. She admitted to seeing bruises on Emily's arms and legs, though she had convinced herself they were accidents. She also revealed that Derek frequently targeted Shadow, using the dog as an outlet for his rage whenever he felt frustrated or drunk. He'd lock Shadow outside in the rain for days at a time, Sarah said, her voice cracking. Or he'd kick him, throw things at him. Once I caught him holding a lit cigarette to Shadow's side. He laughed when the dog yelped. I begged him to stop, but he just told me to mind my own business. As Sarah spoke, Shadow shifted slightly, resting his head on her foot as if offering comfort. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the bond he still shared with Emily's mother, despite everything they had endured. The bikers listened intently, documenting every detail to present to the authorities. By the time they left Sarah's house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. The weight of the day's revelations settled over them, but beneath it lay a glimmer of hope. They finally had enough evidence to confront Derek, not just for Emily's sake, but for Shadow's as well. Justice might not bring Emily back, but it could ensure that no one else suffered because of Derek's cruelty. As they walked back to their bikes, Shadow trotted alongside them, his head held higher than ever before. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time since they had found him, the dog seemed to sense that change was possible, and the bikers, united by their mission, vowed to see it through, to honor Emily's memory and give Shadow the life he deserved. With Sarah's detailed confession and Shadow's behavioral analysis in hand, the Iron Riders felt they finally had the ammunition needed to bring Derek to justice. But taking on someone as volatile and calculating as him wasn't going to be easy. They knew they had to tread carefully. One wrong move could jeopardize their case, or worse, put Sarah and Shadow in danger. Still, the bikers were determined not to let Derek escape accountability for the pain he had inflicted. Jake took the lead once again, using his connections from his days as a police officer to coordinate with local law enforcement. He arranged a meeting with Detective Martinez, an old colleague known for her tenacity and fairness. Over coffee at a quiet diner, Jake laid out everything they had uncovered. Sarah's account of Derek's abuse, Shadow's reactions during the behavioral tests, and even the neighbors' testimonies about the frequent arguments and disturbances coming from Sarah's home. Detective Martinez listened intently, her expression growing graver with each revelation. "This is serious," she said when Jake finished speaking. "If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, we're looking at more than just domestic violence. We're talking about child endangerment, animal cruelty, and possibly manslaughter. But we'll need solid evidence to make this stick." Jake nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "We've got Sarah willing to testify now," he replied. "And Dr. Harper's report on Shadow gives us a strong foundation, but we'll need your help to build the rest of the case." Detective Martinez agreed to collaborate, promising to file for a warrant to search Derek's property and interview him formally. In the meantime, she urged the Iron Riders to keep gathering information while ensuring Sarah and Shadow remained safe. Knowing Derek's violent tendencies, the bikers decided to station themselves near Sarah's house, keeping watch day and night to prevent any retaliation. It was a risky move, but they weren't about to leave her unprotected. A few days later, Detective Martinez called Jake with an update. "We found something at Derek's place," she said, her tone cautious but excited. "Burn marks on the walls, broken furniture, and traces of blood in the living room. There's also a journal where he scribbled threats against Sarah and Emily. It's not much, but combined with Sarah's statement and Shadow's behavior, it strengthens our case significantly." The news gave the bikers renewed hope, but they knew they couldn't celebrate yet. The real test would come when they confronted Derek directly. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, Detective Martinez and her team brought Derek in for questioning. At first, he denied everything, playing the role of the innocent boyfriend caught in a misunderstanding. But as the detectives pressed him with specifics, details only someone involved in the abuse would know, his composure began to crack. "You think you can pin this on me?" Derek spat, leaning forward aggressively in his chair. "That junkie girlfriend of mine probably made all this up to get back at me. She's always been jealous of how I treated her precious little brat." His words sent chills through the interrogation room, confirming everything Sarah and Shadow had hinted at. Detective Martinez remained calm, countering his accusations with hard facts. "We have witnesses who heard the fights," she said firmly. "We have medical records showing injuries consistent with abuse, and we have a dog that reacts violently whenever it sees your face. You can deny it all you want, but the truth has a way of coming out." Finally, under mounting pressure, Derek broke down. He admitted to physically abusing both Sarah and Emily, though he tried to downplay the severity of his actions. When asked about the night of the accident, however, his story unraveled completely. He claimed Emily had run into the street after arguing with him, insisting it was her fault for being disobedient. But his version of events contradicted Sarah's testimony, which painted a clear picture of Derek's rage escalating until Emily fled in terror. By the end of the interrogation, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. Derek was responsible for Emily's death. While it may have been an accident in the strictest sense, his actions leading up to the crash left no room for excuses. The authorities charged him with multiple counts, including child endangerment, domestic violence, and involuntary manslaughter. As he was led away in handcuffs, the weight of the moment hit everyone present, including the Iron Riders who had worked tirelessly to ensure justice prevailed. Back at the clubhouse, the bikers gathered around Shadow, sharing a rare moment of quiet reflection. For weeks, they had poured their energy into uncovering the truth, driven by a shared sense of purpose. Now, with Derek behind bars, they allowed themselves to breathe a little easier. Shadow seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, too. He wagged, his tail tentatively, nuzzling against Jake's leg as if thanking him for everything they had done. But their work wasn't over yet. Though Derek was facing consequences for his crimes, Sarah still needed support to rebuild her life. Haunted by guilt and grief, she struggled to imagine a future without Emily. The bikers promised to stand by her, offering practical help and emotional encouragement as she navigated the difficult road ahead. They also ensured Shadow stayed close to her, knowing the bond between them could provide comfort during the darkest moments. In the weeks that followed, the Iron Riders turned their attention to honoring Emily's memory. Inspired by Shadow's unwavering loyalty, they launched a community initiative aimed at raising awareness about domestic violence and animal cruelty. They organized fundraisers, hosted educational workshops, and partnered with local shelters to provide resources for families in need. Their efforts not only kept Emily's spirit alive, but also created a lasting legacy that touched countless lives. Through it all, Shadow remained a symbol of resilience and hope. His journey from a frightened stray to a beloved member of the Iron Riders family reminded everyone of the power of compassion and determination. Though scars, both visible and invisible, would always linger, Shadow's transformation served as proof that healing was possible, even after unimaginable trauma. As the town came together to support Sarah and remember Emily, a new sense of unity emerged. Neighbors who had once turned a blind eye to the signs of trouble vowed to do better. recognizing their role in preventing similar tragedies. Children learned the importance of kindness and courage, inspired by the bond between Shadow and Emily. And the Iron Riders, once seen as outsiders, became heroes in the eyes of many, for standing up against injustice and refusing to give up until the truth came to light. For Shadow, life began to change in ways he never could have imagined. No longer a shadow of his former self, he thrived in the care of the bikers who showered him with love and affection. He still carried the memories of his past, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he became a beacon of hope, a living reminder that even in the darkest times light could prevail. With Derek behind bars and justice finally served, the town began to heal. But the scars of Emily's tragic death would never fully fade. For Sarah, the road to recovery was long and painful. The guilt of not protecting her daughter weighed heavily on her, and there were days when she felt like giving up entirely. Yet surrounded by the unwavering support of the Iron Riders, she found the strength to take small steps forward. Shadow played a crucial role in this process, his presence offering comfort and companionship that words alone could never provide. Sarah often sat outside on quiet evenings, Shadow lying beside her as they watched the sunset. Sometimes she talked to him about Emily, sharing stories of her laughter, her kindness, and the dreams she had for her future. Other times they simply sat in silence, finding solace in each other's company. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to rebuild her life. She started attending counseling sessions arranged by the bikers, joined a local support group for survivors of domestic violence, and even volunteered at an animal shelter inspired by Shadow's story. Each step brought her closer to forgiveness, not just for Derek but for herself. The Iron Riders continued to play an active role in Sarah's journey, ensuring she never felt alone. They helped her repair her home, which had fallen into disrepair, during Derek's stay, and encouraged her to pursue new opportunities. One of the bikers, Mike, who owned a mechanic shop, offered Sarah a part-time job answering phones and handling paperwork. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of purpose and independence she hadn't felt in years. Over time, Sarah began to smile again, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes, and those around her noticed the change. Meanwhile, Shadow became more than just a loyal companion. He became a symbol of resilience and redemption. His transformation from a traumatized stray to a beloved member of the community inspired countless others. People marveled at how far he had come, marveling at his ability to trust again despite everything he had endured. The bikers often joked that Shadow was their unofficial mascot now, trotting alongside them during charity rides and community events. Children adored him, flocking to pet him and hear stories about his bravery. He had gone from being a shadow in the literal and figurative sense to standing proudly in the light. Recognizing the impact Shadow's story had on people, the Iron Riders decided to honor Emily's memory by creating a foundation dedicated to helping children and animals affected by abuse. They named it Emily's Light, after her bright spirit that had touched so many lives. Through fundraisers, awareness campaigns, and partnerships with shelters and advocacy groups, the foundation provided resources and support to families in need. It also offered free training programs for therapy dogs, using Shadow as its poster, pup, to highlight the healing power of unconditional love. Every year, on the anniversary of Emily's passing, the Iron Riders organized a special event called A Day of Remembrance. Hundreds of people from the town and surrounding areas gathered at the cemetery where Emily was buried. They brought flowers, candles, and handwritten notes expressing their gratitude for the lessons her life and Shadow's loyalty had taught them. Shadow always attended these gatherings, sitting quietly by Emily's grave as if keeping watch over her final resting place. It was a poignant reminder that while Emily may have been gone, her legacy lived on through the lives she had touched. One particularly moving moment occurred during the third annual Remembrance event. A young girl named Lily approached Shadow cautiously, clutching a stuffed animal in one hand and a drawing in the other. Her mother explained that Lily had recently escaped an abusive household and was still struggling to adjust. "She's been asking about Shadow ever since we heard his story," the mother said softly. I think meeting him might help. Jake knelt beside Lily, introducing her to Shadow gently. At first, the little girl hesitated, unsure whether the large dog would welcome her, but Shadow, sensing her fear, lowered his head and licked her hand tenderly. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you." In that moment, everyone present understood the profound connection between human and animal, the way they could heal each other without uttering a single word. As the years passed, the Iron Riders' efforts expanded beyond their small town, gaining national attention. News outlets featured Shadow's story, highlighting the work of Emily's Light and inspiring others to join the cause. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing the foundation to reach even more families and animals in need. Schools invited members of the group to speak to students about the importance of kindness, courage, and standing up against injustice, and everywhere they went, Shadow accompanied them, his tail wagging and his eyes shining with the same determination that had driven him to follow Emily's coffin all those years ago. For Jake and the rest of the Iron Riders, Shadow's presence was a constant reminder of why they did what they did. He embodied the values they held dear: loyalty, resilience, and the belief that no one should suffer in silence. They knew they couldn't change the past or bring Emily back, but they could ensure her memory continued to make a difference. By honoring her through their actions, they hoped to create a world where tragedies like hers wouldn't happen again. And so Shadow thrived, not just as a survivor, but as a hero in his own right. His journey from a broken, abandoned dog to a cherished member of a loving community showed that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, patience, and compassion. Though he would always carry the scars of his past, they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as a testament to his strength and the unbreakable bond he had shared with Emily. On warm summer nights, when the stars twinkled brightly above, Shadow could often be found lying on the clubhouse porch, his head resting on his paws as he gazed out into the distance. Some said he was watching for Emily, waiting for the day they would meet again. Others believed he was simply content, knowing he had done everything he could to protect her memory and inspire others to live with courage and kindness. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Shadow's story had changed lives, including his own. Through his loyalty, his bravery, and his refusal to give up, he had become a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. And as long as the Iron Riders stood by his side, his light would continue to shine, guiding others toward a brighter, kinder future.